Cult of the Ancient Gods. I was already a fairly experienced reporter. For many years I wrote stories about folklore, unusual phenomena, mysterious events, the unexplained. Many knew me and were still relatively willing to publish my material, although for the most part these were small tabloid publications. The days of my glory were long gone. I hadn't produced a great viral article in a long time, for now people had almost forgotten me. One successful article, just one, and I'd be back on top. Publishing houses would come running to me with outstretched hands, trying to lure me over, and I would look down on them and sort through them like the ultimate capricious diva. Just one successful article and everything would change. For a very long time, nothing came my way, until one day in a cheap bar, where I had to dwell due to my dire financial situation, I encountered two strange fellows. They looked formidable and somehow cold, like when you're in a room with a natural predator. You and he are sizing each other up, and you're uncomfortable with the power and danger emanating from him. They sat down next to me and started asking about local folklore, strange stories, local cults, which were so widespread in the small villages around Ransk. I, as someone who had long been involved with local legends, could certainly help them, and, of course, not for free, which I mentioned aloud. The larger one stared at me grimly, and all I could do was physically shrink into myself, like a frightened turtle, and regret my words. I was ready to do anything just to get them to let me go, but the smaller one smiled at me as if he was about to publicly chop off my head, took a gold coin out of his inside pocket and rolled it towards me. Of course I was shocked because I thought they were going to do something to me that would require a very long treatment at Ransk's first city hospital. They questioned me about the local strange creatures supposedly inhabiting this area since time immemorial. They asked about the local villages lost in the dense Ransk forests, about the ancient demons of the locals and how they interacted with them and how they fought them. I eagerly answered them in detail, trying not to miss anything. The brothers didn't introduce themselves, and I mostly communicated with the smaller one because I was simply afraid to look at the larger one. At some point, their questions began to concern only one village, called Marushkino. Villages and hamlets with this name are scattered throughout our vast country, but this village is one of a kind. No one really knew its exact location. It was just a small dying village. It wasn't on modern maps, and the old paper maps were kept in archives that weren't easy to access. Rumors about Marushkinci constantly circulate on internet forums and in telegram channels dedicated to all things supernatural, as well as among the residents of local villages and hamlets. Time and again, rumors have surfaced about another adventurer or blogger disappearing without a trace in the dense forests of Ransk while trying to find the village of Marushkino. Finding a guide there was possible, but they were exclusively old locals, who not only had to be found among dozens of local villages, but also first washed, sobered up, and persuaded to lead the way. Rumor had it there was no road, or even a barely discernible path, and only the most desperate and drunken guides would agree to show the way. The Marushkino folks lived a very isolated life, providing for themselves, living off the land, and only occasionally visiting neighboring villages to exchange their surplus produce for household items they couldn't make themselves. The villagers were described as sullen, dirty people in unkempt clothes, not always the right size. Invariably, the men wore long beards, avoided eye contact, spoke little, and exuded a smell of milk and hay. They weren't always so withdrawn. About a quarter of a century ago, they were more open to contact with the outside world, and people often traveled to and from their relatives in Marushkino. One day, a huge fire broke out in the village, which coincidentally coincided with the completion of the construction of a new church and the appointment of a new priest. It is said that half the village burned down and almost every family lost loved ones. Since then, the village has become more isolated and religious. Gradually, the Marushkino Falk's communication with neighboring villages dwindled, and rumors began to spread about strange religious rites introduced by the new priest. The essence of these rites was a bizarre mixture of old believer and pagan pantheons. Some of the last people to visit relatives there even spoke of strange chants in an incomprehensible language, appeals to animalistic ancient gods, supposedly dwelling in the local forests and caves since ancient times, and even human sacrifices. But all these stories were usually dismissed as idle gossip about reclusive neighbors and the savagery of uneducated villagers. I told the brothers everything I knew. I also told them about the local folklore pantheon and the methods people used to interact with it. The only thing I didn't mention was that I had an old map of these local villages and settlements, but the brothers didn't ask about it. I also kept silent about the fact that, desperately needing a breakthrough article, I realized that since such suspicious people were interested in this place, there must be something there. It was my golden ticket, as I thought then, and if I had known the situation I would find myself in later, I would have gladly written fictional articles and recipes for the magazine Grandma's Remedies. The doctors give me about a week at most, and I will tell you what happened there firsthand, since no one will believe me anyway. To be honest, I don't fully believe myself. Now I am completely blind, and every night in the silence I clearly see the events that transpired. My brain, in an attempt to protect the remnants of my mind, says that it was all just a dream, a consequence of the illness that struck me. But I will tell you, and you decide for yourself whether it was real or just a figment of a sick mind. South after that conversation in the bar, I realized I couldn't delay. I had a sensation in front of me, and I had to be the first to report it. I needed this article, one big breakthrough article. Like a hunting dog, I picked up the scent. That same evening I got ready to go. I took my phone and a couple of external batteries. I didn't want the charge to run out while I was recording everything on camera. I also threw a few dry rations, a couple of bottles of water, a voice recorder, and a notepad for possible notes into my backpack. And I set off. I managed to cover most of the way in my old SUV, then I followed the maps. I went into a couple of villages and asked the locals some questions to check the map and to have witnesses that I was indeed there and had gone in search of the mysterious village. The locals invariably readily made contact, but when they learned about my destination, they mostly frowned, turned away, and left the conversation. There were also many who urged me to turn back and forget about this village. Now I deeply regret that I was so presumptuous that I didn't listen to the good people. Only a couple of old-timers helped me and pointed me in the right direction. I wanted to play it safe and compare the people's testimonies with the data on my map. It took me about another day to push my way through the dense, impenetrable forest towards the village. At some point, I had to make camp, build a fire, prepare my simple rations, and spend the night. Despite all the scary stories about the village and the eerie atmosphere created by the dense thicket, I slept surprisingly well. Surprisingly, I was practically untouched by mosquitoes and other small creatures. Emerging from the forest at the edge, I saw the legendary village before me and moved towards the gate. I was surprised that the village was surrounded by a dense wooden palisade, which in some places had tilted and gaped with openings large enough for a middle-aged man of my build to squeeze through sideways. Lucky. Approaching the village gate, I expected to hear the typical rural noise, people talking, livestock cries or at least something, but there was absolute silence in the air. I stopped and listened. The sound of the wind rustling in the treetops, the quiet creak of the half-open gate, and that was all. No birds, no animals, no people. Having taken several pictures of the gate and the area, pleased with myself, I moved on. Desolation awaited me in the village itself. Empty houses, dilapidated roofs, grass starting to sprout on the roads. It was clear that no one had lived here for a long time. I even felt a little cheated. I started to think that this was just an ordinary abandoned village, and I was already figuring out how and what I would squeeze out of this story since I was here. Walking through the empty streets in absolute silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, a sense of something being wrong. Getting closer to the houses, I discovered strange symbols drawn on them. The translator on my phone yielded no results, and after taking a few pictures, I decided to enter one of the houses. The door was unlocked and the windows were not boarded up. There was food on the table in the house, which had already become moldy and inedible, seemingly many years ago. The beds were made, and icons stood in the corner of the house. Slowly, I approached them, instinctively trying not to make noise for some reason, but it seemed to me as if the sounds of my steps were carrying for tens of meters in this silence. Looking closely, I realized that the images standing in the corner could only be very loosely called icons. In the places where one usually sees the somber faces of saints, there were depicted some kind of animal people, creatures with animal heads and human bodies. It seemed that the postures of the bodies in the paintings depicted certain symbols, the meaning of which I did not understand. Of course, I took several pictures of this corner, the icons, and the interior of the house. Leaving the house, I saw a lone church standing right in the middle of the village, with a single spire that seemed to pierce the heavens. The other houses were located some distance from it, and this created an eerie impression, as if the others were afraid to be in the immediate vicinity of the temple. I realized that my goal was there, and it was there that I would get the material I needed for my brilliant article. I approached the church, which looked as desolate as the other houses that surrounded it. However, unlike them, the church door was wide open. It moved relatively easily on its hinges, and it occurred to me that this door was probably used regularly since it hadn't had time to completely rust, which means there might be someone inside, some marginal or local resident. Who knows? It's worth being careful. Having opened the massive door with relative ease, I found myself inside, where it was so quiet that I heard the noise in my head. Ancient-looking images of some humanoid creatures with wings hung on the walls. The paintings depicted these creatures emerging from under the ground and communicating with people. Judging by the condition of the material, these images were several hundred years old. Just sell them on the black market and you're rich. But at least I photographed them. It's something. From one of the images, the largest one, a black goat stared at me. It seemed to be watching me furiously, just waiting for the moment to attack. And from another painting, a beautiful naked woman with full breasts, but a body fused with the body of a spider, looked at me carnivorously and lustfully. She spread her arms as if inviting me into her embrace, promising peace, joy, and pleasure. With great difficulty and reluctance, turning my back to them, I began to examine the room further. While I was taking pictures of the floor and the inscriptions on the walls, cold sweat ran down my back. I kept turning around, thinking that the creatures from the paintings were actually watching me. I really wanted to leave this place, but I definitely needed a smashing, sensational article. I realized that I was on the trail of something worthwhile, and this time I would definitely have some killer material. Taking photos, I searched and searched. I wanted to find something that would attract the public's attention and go viral. In the corner of the church, I noticed two wide-open cellar doors in the floor. Without hesitation, I moved towards the dark maw of the cellar. Carefully, I began to descend the stairs leading into the dark room. Probing the walls with a flashlight, I tried to dispel the darkness. With each step, my heart beat faster and faster, and at some point it began to seem to me that the beating of my heart was echoing deep through the corridors of this gloomy place. The cellar walls were damp, and thick cobwebs hung here and there. The air resembled the rotten smell of mold or some spoiled food, or maybe all of it together. Reaching the bottom of the stairs and walking a few meters forward, I heard strange sounds, some kind of noise. Overcoming my fear, I moved on, preparing my camera and holding a flashlight in my hand. After a few more meters, I heard the noise transform into a kind of whisper. It was clearly human speech. Listening closely, I realized that the words resembled some Slavic dialect, but a more hissing one, as if the sound came not from the larynx, but from some rapid vibration, similar to the one insects create with the rapid movements of their limbs. I managed to make out only a few words: she-spider, mistress, service. I was getting closer and closer to the source of the sound. It was hard and scary to breathe. I tried not to inhale loudly, not to step loudly, so as not to attract the attention of the speakers. The closer I got, the wilder horrors my imagination painted. At some point, I even thought that maybe all these gloomy legends weren't lying, and I should leave this nasty place right now, while there's still a chance. But I needed the article desperately. Right now, I'm clearly on the verge of something serious. Reaching the room where the sound originated, I stopped, switched off my flashlight, and turned on my phone's camera. I was lucky. This room wasn't as dark, and long rays of light penetrated from somewhere. Mustering my courage and taking a deep breath, I peeked around the corner. Spider cocoons hung everywhere on the ceiling, containing human-shaped figures wrapped inside. In places, decayed remains of human heads and entwined limbs protruded from the cocoons. Torn animal bodies lay scattered on the floor, not just herbivores. There were also remains resembling wolves, and, it seemed, even bears. In the very center of the room sat a creature with a human body, the back of which was a giant spider with a flayed hide covering the human spine. The creature was listening, its breathing even and heavy, and on the mutilated half-human face, rows of eyes glowed like embers in a fire. Then its breathing abruptly stopped. The creature froze mid-inhale. Shrinking with terror and feeling goosebumps literally piercing my skin, I realized I was alone with this monster. It looked at me, and time stopped for a moment. I forgot how to breathe. The head stared at me with the unblinking gaze of dozens of eyes, motionless, while the creature's body slowly turned towards me, its spider legs softly padding against the wooden floor. It seemed as if the head was simply suspended in the air. Trying not to lose my mind, I began analyzing everything. I tried to occupy my mind with details and realized that this had once been a man, a priest, as there were tattered remnants of a clergyman's cassock on his body. I started to wander my gaze over the patterns of his clothing, but then a wild shriek and chattering erupted. I realized that my own voice was mixed into this cacophony. The vile, hungry creature lunged at me. After that, my body moved on its own, and my consciousness vanished for a few seconds. Finally, I realized I was already running towards the stairs, screaming wildly in terror, and behind me I could hear rapidly moving spider legs mixed with some kind of shriek or howl. The narrow corridor of the basement didn't allow me to dodge a jump or a blow, let alone hide anywhere. But at the same time, It prevented the creature from making that jump. We were forced to test each other's speed, and yet the disgusting spider was catching up to me. I simply had no chance to escape from it, but fear and the will to live drove me forward, even though I hadn't run in many years. I stumbled over some pile in the darkness and with great effort prevented myself from falling. This played into the monster's hands, so to speak. Running up the stairs, I heard the monster approaching behind me, its chelicerae already clicking. I was already at the basement exit when the monster finally jumped on me. I heard the basement ceiling crack. Large beams crashed down noisily behind me, blocking the passage. I couldn't keep up the pace and fell on my stomach. My lungs were burning. I tried to take deep breaths, but the air seemed to simply not enter my body. In panic, I just had to roll on the ground until it subsided. The creature was hitting the beams from somewhere below, tearing off large chunks. Getting out was only a matter of time for it, and a very short time at that. I ran again. Every step of the run echoed with the weight of fear and the pain of an untrained body. The monster of the ancient cult would soon get out and chase after me. I knew that for sure. The seconds I had gained needed to be used wisely. I understood perfectly well that I wouldn't be able to outrun the monster in open terrain. In a straight run, I was definitely slower than it, even in my best younger years. So, I had to run into the forest, move through rough terrain. Yes, it would be harder for me to move, but also for the spider. Besides, I would have a chance to hide somewhere. I rushed into the forest through the village streets. In case the monster caught up with me, I needed a weapon to keep it at a distance. I ran into the nearest yard in search of anything resembling a weapon, at least a pitchfork, because there should be one in every yard. I rushed into the shed and found what I needed. As soon as I grabbed the handle, I heard a loud, furious roar from the street, coming from the direction of the unholy church. It wasn't hard to guess what was making that roar. The monster had lost me. Excellent. As carefully as I could, but at top speed, bent over, I reached the forest. I heard the creature furiously breaking into houses, heard the shutters and walls cracking under the weight of the beast's strength, and realized that I definitely couldn't handle such power. I ran through the forest as fast as I could, as far away as possible. I threw away everything that could weigh me down, my bag and everything in my pockets. After running like this for about 10 minutes, hoping that I had finally broken away, I slowed down. I was at my limit. The ancient power didn't make me wait long, and I heard the creature's half-human roar again. How is this possible? Did it track me down? But I had a head start, and the creature still doesn't know exactly where I am. At least I hoped so. Thus I had the advantage. It was important to maintain it. For almost a whole day we played hide and seek with the monster. Losing this game meant my death. I needed to reach my SUV and leave this place. I wasn't thinking about the article anymore. When night fell, my strength finally left me. I simply had to rest, otherwise I risked dying from exhaustion. The creature was always somewhere nearby. Its howls and noises were heard sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but it was always somewhere nearby. Finally, I found a tree with a small space in its roots to hide, wait out the night, and regain my strength. Covered from head to toe in mud and earth, I lay down under the roots, hiding my pitchfork in the grass, and fell into an uneasy sleep. I dreamt that I was standing in a church covered in blood, surrounded by people screaming, moaning, and crying chaotically. Everything around me was in motion. No one stopped, and the priest stood at the altar, continuously emitting a guttural howl. And suddenly, a head began to rise from the basement, which transitioned into a naked female body. and then into the enormous body of a spider. I woke up from the noise. The creature was very close. I could hear its heavy breathing. I could hear it deeply inhaling air through its nostrils. I could hear the creature quietly shuffling its huge paws on the ground. At that moment, I thanked myself for thinking to cover myself with earth and mask my scent. But the sound of the monster was getting closer and closer. I started to tremble uncontrollably. My uneven, nervous breathing began to betray me and could give me away at any second. I covered my eyes and mouth with my hands, trying to calm down. Judging by the sound, the creature was very close. The monster could find me at any moment. Opening my eyes slightly, I saw a huge spider slowly turning in place, clearly searching for me. And here I did something I never expected of myself. Trembling on shaky legs, I quietly stood up, raised the pitchfork, and with all my might plunged it into the creature's back. A loud roar of pain deafened me and echoed throughout the area. Time and rain had taken their toll and apparently dulled the pitchfork. They didn't go in as deep as I would have liked, despite the fact that I struck with all my remaining strength. Fortunately, I still managed to pierce the skin and wound the creature. The spider jerked sharply, and I almost dropped my weapon. Preparing for a new blow, I only sliced the air as the monster rushed into the forest. I didn't pursue it. I needed to run and hide again. Despite the pain throughout my body, fear and the will to live drove me forward. The sleep had given me some strength. While I was running to the car, I didn't hear the creature, but I felt its presence. I felt that I was being watched. Finally, I reached my SUV. When I saw my car, my heart felt a little lighter and I exhaled heavily. Putting my weapon on the ground, I moved towards the vehicle, imagining how long it would take me to forget all this and recover. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced me between the shoulder blades and some monstrous force pressed me to the ground. It was the spider, of course. It bit me in the back and, pressing me to the ground, began to literally devour me. I jerked sharply, tearing pieces of my own flesh from the arachnid's jaws. Screaming in pain, I rushed to my pitchfork and the creature rushed after me. All I managed to do, grabbing the weapon, was to strike the creature right in the neck with all my might, using both hands. The creature, in mid-leap, impaled itself on the blades, fully immersing them in its disgusting flesh. Shrieking hoarsely with a kind of whimpering whine, the disgusting monster rushed back into the forest, and I slowly moved towards my car. Getting behind the wheel, I lost consciousness from pain, shock, fatigue, and, as the doctors later said, some kind of strong poison. Apparently, this creature poisoned its victims and then devoured them. Waking up in the car, I barely managed to drive to Ransk and went to the hospital. The doctors couldn't help me. The poison is slowly killing me. Now I can't see anything and even breathing is difficult. I got the material for my article, but I couldn't use it. All I can do is tell you what happened and warn you about the wild ancient cults that flourish on the outskirts of the villages near Ransk. Having finished his story, the reporter sighed heavily and raggedly and fell asleep. Two men silently left the ward. One was tall, physically strong and sullen, while the smaller one simply smiled and twirled a gold coin in his hand.